Those old sights belong in a museum, not on a modern firearm. That's what the instructor said when he noticed the worn service pistol on the old man's hip. No red dot, no holographic sight, just two simple pieces of metal that had been aligning shots since before the instructor was born. The classroom full of students chuckled. The old man said nothing. He just looked down at his hands, weathered and spotted with age, and waited. What happened next on that firing range would force every person there to question everything they thought they knew about marksmanship. If you believe some skills never become obsolete, comment fundamentals before we continue. The Ridgeline Tactical Training Center sat on 40 acres of converted farmland in eastern Tennessee. It had earned a reputation as one of the premier civilian shooting academies in the region, drawing students from across the southeast who wanted to learn defensive pistol craft. The facility boasted electronic target systems, simulated stress courses, and instructors who had served in various tactical units. The director, a man named Vance Holloway, had built the center from nothing over 15 years, and he took pride in staying current with the latest equipment and techniques. Every instructor on staff carried a pistol equipped with a micro-red dot sight. It wasn't just preference, it was policy. Vance believed that teaching anything else was preparing students for yesterday's fight. The morning class that September Tuesday included the usual mix: young professionals who'd never owned a firearm, a few experienced hunters looking to transition into defensive training, retired law enforcement officers maintaining their skills, and one quiet figure who had registered online the night before filling a last-minute cancellation. His name on the roster read simply E. Whitmore. He arrived in a faded canvas jacket, khaki trousers that had seen better decades, and a pair of scuffed leather boots. His hair was white and thin, his posture slightly stooped, his movements deliberate and unhurried. He looked like someone's grandfather who had wandered in looking for a hardware store. When he signed the liability waiver, the receptionist noticed his handwriting was precise and steady despite the slight tremor in his fingers. The lead instructor that morning was Kyle Brennan, 34 years old, built like a CrossFit competitor, and possessed of the particular confidence that comes from 8 years in law enforcement followed by a successful pivot into firearms training. Kyle was good at what he did. His students consistently scored well on qualification courses. His YouTube channel had nearly 200,000 subscribers. He had been featured in industry publications discussing the technological revolution in pistol optics. He genuinely believed he was helping people, and in many ways, he was. But Kyle had developed a blind spot common to those who achieve success early. He had begun to confuse his way with the only way. The classroom portion of the course covered the expected material: grip fundamentals, stance, the importance of consistent draw stroke. Kyle moved through the slides efficiently, pausing occasionally to demonstrate with his own pistol, a customized handgun wearing a $500 red dot sight that sat like a small television screen above the slide. When he reached the section on sight alignment, he held up the weapon and smiled at the class. "Now some of you might have grown up shooting iron sights," he said. "Your dads or granddads probably taught you front sight focus, equal height, equal light, all that old doctrine. And look, that worked fine when it was all we had. But technology moves forward. These days, teaching someone to use iron sights is like teaching them to drive a horse and buggy. Sure, it's quaint, it's nostalgic. But if you want to survive a real defensive encounter, you need every advantage. The red dot puts you ahead of the threat. You put the dot on target and press. Simple." He tapped the optic affectionately. "This is the future. Iron sights are the past." Several students nodded along. The young professionals looked relieved that technology would shortcut the learning curve. The hunters seemed receptive to the idea of modernizing. Only the old man in the back row sat without expression, his hands folded on the desk in front of him. Kyle noticed him and felt a small flicker of irritation. He recognized the type, old-timers who couldn't accept that the world had passed them by, who clung to tradition because admitting change meant admitting their own obsolescence. "Sir," Kyle said, addressing the old man directly, "I notice you're carrying something without an optic. Is that what you'll be using for the range portion today?" The old man looked up. His eyes were pale blue, almost grey, and there was something in them that Kyle couldn't quite read. "It is," he said simply. His voice was quiet, slightly hoarse, but clear enough to carry. Kyle nodded slowly, performing patience for the benefit of the other students. "Well, that's fine for today. We can work with what you've got, but I'd strongly recommend upgrading before any serious defensive training. Those old sights, they're just not competitive anymore. Response time, accuracy under stress, low light performance. The data is overwhelming. Red dots win on every metric. I appreciate the advice, the old man said. Nothing more. The class moved to the range. Students collected their eye and ear protection, their ammunition, their rental firearms for those who hadn't brought their own. The morning was cool and clear, perfect conditions for shooting. Kyle ran through the safety briefing with practiced efficiency, then positioned students at the firing line for the first drill. It was a basic exercise. 5 rounds at 7 yards, focused on grip and sight picture. Simple enough to build confidence, diagnostic enough to reveal fundamental errors. The students fired in rotation. Some did well. Others revealed the flinching and trigger slapping that plague new shooters. Kyle moved down the line, offering corrections, adjusting grips, demonstrating proper technique. He was, despite his ego, a capable teacher when he focused on the student rather than himself. But when he reached the old man's position, something made him pause. The old man had removed his jacket, revealing a simple cotton shirt beneath. His arms were lean, almost thin, but there was a quality to how he held the pistol that caught Kyle's attention. The grip was perfect, not textbook perfect, beyond textbook. It was the grip of someone who had internalized the mechanics so deeply that conscious thought no longer played a role. The pistol seemed to simply belong in his hands, an extension rather than a tool. "Whenever you're ready," Kyle said. The old man raised the pistol with a smoothness that contradicted his age. There was no wasted motion, no adjustment. The weapon came up and his focus went to the front sight with the certainty of tide-following moon. 5 shots cracked out in steady rhythm, not rushed, not slow, just perfectly metered. Each report followed by the gentle exhale that marked proper trigger reset and breath control. Kyle leaned forward to look at the target. 5 holes formed a cluster that could be covered by a quarter. Dead center. "Good group," Kyle admitted, keeping his voice casual. "But try that at speed, under stress, in low light. That's where the optic advantage really shows." The old man said nothing. He simply reloaded and waited for the next drill. As the morning progressed, Kyle began to feel something he rarely experienced. Uncertainty. Every drill, every distance, every variation he threw at the class, the old man performed flawlessly. Not just accurately, but with an economy of motion that the other students couldn't help but notice. He didn't rush, he didn't compete, he simply executed, each task with quiet precision, and returned to his patient stillness. The students began glancing at him between their own strings of fire. Even Kyle found himself watching, trying to identify some technique, some secret that explained what he was seeing. During the break, one of the younger students approached the old man near the water station. "Sir, how long have you been shooting?" he asked. The old man considered the question. "Since 1958, he said, give or take." The student's eyes widened. "That's over 60 years. Were you in the military?" "I was." "What branch? What did you do?" The old man smiled slightly, the first expression beyond neutral he had shown all morning. "A little of everything," he said, "here and there." He didn't elaborate, and something in his tone suggested the conversation had ended. The afternoon session focused on speed drills and dynamic movement. This was where Kyle expected to see the old man struggle, drawing and shooting while moving required reflexes and physical conditioning that age inevitably eroded. He set up a simple course. 3 targets at varying distances. Students would start from concealment, draw on the buzzer, engage each target with 2 rounds while moving laterally, then reload and address a final target. Time and accuracy would both be scored. Kyle ran the demonstration himself, moving with athletic grace, his red dot dancing between targets as he flowed through the course. His time was impressive, one of the best the students had ever seen. He finished with a satisfied nod and reset the course. Students ran through in rotation. Some did well. Others struggled with the multitasking of movement, marksmanship, and manipulation. Magazines fumbled, shots went wide, the complexity exposed gaps that static shooting had concealed. Through it all, the old man waited his turn without comment. When he finally stepped to the line, Kyle felt the attention of the entire class focus, even the other. Instructors had drifted over, Drawn by word spreading about the quiet old-timer with the impossible groups, the buzzer sounded. What happened next would be discussed at that facility for years. The old man moved with a fluidity that seemed to exist outside of time, not fast in the young man's way with its explosive bursts and aggressive energy, but efficient in a way that transcended speed. Every motion served a purpose. No step wasted an inch. No hand movement travelled an unnecessary arc. The pistol came out of concealment and the first 2 shots broke before he seemed to have fully acquired the sight picture. But they were centre hits. Both of them. He flowed laterally, feet crossing in a pattern that looked almost like a dance step from another era, and the second target collected its rounds with the same mechanical precision. The reload was invisible. One moment the slide locked back, the next a fresh magazine was seated, and the gun was up again. The final target fell to 2 more, perfect hits. When the echo faded, the timer showed a number that made Kyle blink. It was faster than his own run, by nearly 0.2 of a second, with iron sights. Silence hung over the range. Then one of the younger students actually started clapping before catching himself. Kyle walked to the targets, checked the scoring, walked back. His face had gone through several colours. "That's," he started, then stopped. Professional pride warred with honesty. "That's exceptional shooting. Where did you learn to move like that?" The old man ejected his magazine and cleared his weapon before answering. "Various places," he said. "A training facility in North Carolina that doesn't exist on any map. A compound in Arizona. Some ranges overseas that I couldn't point to on a globe anymore. You pick things up over 50 years. 50 years of what exactly?" Before the old man could answer, a black SUV pulled into the gravel lot beside the range. The vehicle had government plates. 2 men in suits stepped out, but it was the third figure that made everyone pause. A man in his 60s with silver hair and the bearing of someone accustomed to commanding attention. He wore a visitor badge from some official facility and walked with the confidence of authority held so long it had become invisible. "Sergeant Major Whitmore," he called out. "I thought I might find you at a shooting range." The old man turned, and for the first time his expression showed something like warmth. "General Dawson, been a while." The man in the suit reached them and clasped the old man's hand with both of his own. 14 years since the ceremony. You look good, Ed. Still terrifying instructors with those iron sights. Only when they need terrifying." Kyle watched this exchange with growing bewilderment. "I'm sorry, General, Sergeant Major. Someone want to fill me in?" General Dawson turned to Kyle with the practiced smile of a man who had spent decades managing complicated social situations. "You must be one of the instructors here. I apologize for the interruption. I was in the area and heard through channels that Ed had signed up for a course. Wanted to stop by and say hello to an old friend." He paused, reading Kyle's confusion. "You don't know who you've been teaching today, do you?" "A student named E. Whitmore. Good shooter. Very good. Beyond that." The general laughed softly. "Son, you've been trying to teach marksmanship to Edward James Whitmore. Sergeant Major, United States Army, retired. 42 years of service, 3 tours in Vietnam, operations in places that are still classified. 16 years as the senior instructor at a facility that trains personnel for assignments they can never talk about. He has forgotten more about shooting a pistol than most professionals ever learn. He wrote portions of doctrine that are still used today. And he did all of it with iron sights, because when he started that's what existed and nothing that came after ever convinced him that he needed to change." Kyle felt the blood drain from his face. He thought about his comments in the classroom, the words about horse and buggy, about iron sights belonging in a museum. He had said those things to a man who had likely forgotten more trigger time than Kyle had accumulated in his entire life. "I should also mention," the general continued, seemingly enjoying Kyle's discomfort, "that Ed came here specifically because he believes in continuing education. 50 years of experience and he still signs up for courses, still tries to learn something new. The man could be teaching masterclasses to special operations units, and he shows up to a civilian course to stay humble. That's something a lot of instructors forget. The learning never stops, no matter how much you know." The other students had gathered close, listening with expressions of amazement. The young professionals looked at the old man with new eyes. The hunters nodded with recognition of something they had sensed but couldn't name. Even the retired law enforcement officers stood straighter, unconscious respect shaping their posture. Kyle stood motionless for a long moment. Then he did something that surprised everyone, possibly including himself. He unholstered his own pistol, the expensive one with its gleaming red dot, and held it out to the old man. "Sergeant Major," he said, "would you teach us something? Whatever you think we should know. Consider the rest of the afternoon yours." Ed Whitmore looked at the offered pistol, then at Kyle's face. Whatever he saw there seemed to satisfy him. He shook his head gently at the weapon. "Keep your equipment," he said. "The tool doesn't make the shooter. The fundamentals do." He turned to address the entire class, and when he spoke, his voice carried an authority that had nothing to do with volume. "Red dots are fine tools," he began. "I'm not here to tell you technology is bad. It isn't. An optic can reduce cognitive load, speed up target acquisition in certain conditions, and help aging eyes that don't focus like they used to. But here's what nobody tells you. Every advantage comes with a trade-off. Every piece of technology that does something for you is something you stop doing for yourself. And the moment that technology fails, you're left with whatever foundation you built underneath it." He held up his pistol, the iron sights catching the afternoon light. "These sights teach you focus, not the unfocused gaze at a glowing dot, but true front sight focus. The discipline of making your eye do something it doesn't want to do. That discipline transfers to everything else. When you learn to focus the front sight, you learn to focus under stress. You learn that your body and mind can be directed even when they want to scatter. That lesson will save your life in ways no optic ever will." He paused, letting the words settle. "Iron sights teach you trigger control. A red dot hides small errors. You slap the trigger a little. The dot bounces, but you still get a decent hit, and you never correct the fault. With iron sights, that slap sends your front sight dancing across the target. You see your mistake. You feel your mistake. You learn to press straight back without disturbing alignment because the feedback is immediate and unforgiving. That perfect press you develop transfers to any weapon you'll ever fire for the rest of your life." One of the students raised a hand tentatively. "But what about speed? The instructor showed us data about target acquisition times." "Speed is a product of efficiency," Ed replied. "I've seen young operators with expensive optics fumbling shots because they never learned to index the gun properly. They depend on finding the dot. I've also seen old men like me put first rounds on target faster, because the mechanics are burned into our nervous systems. The gun comes up, the sights align because that's where our hands always put them, and the shot breaks, before conscious thought enters the equation. That's not talent. That's 10,000 hours of doing it right until right becomes automatic." He gestured for Kyle to step forward. "Show me your draw. Slow." Kyle complied, drawing his pistol at quarter speed and presenting toward a target. "There," Ed said. "Your elbow flares. Your support hand meets the gun high. You're fishing for the dot instead of driving to a consistent index point. Your optic lets you get away with that because eventually the dot appears and you adjust. Now watch." He demonstrated his own draw, movements precise and economical. "The gun comes to the same place every time. My front sight appears in the same spot in my field of vision, because my body geometry never changes. I'm not searching for anything. I already know where the sights are because they're always there." That's what iron sight training teaches you. Consistency, repeatability, the ability to do the same thing the same way 1,000 times in a row. For the next 2 hours, Ed Whitmore taught. He covered grip pressure and how a symmetric tension affects sight tracking. He explained why front sight focus works with human vision and how the brain interpolates target position even when the target is blurry. He demonstrated trigger reset and the tactile feedback that tells a trained shooter exactly when the sear re-engages. He discussed stance not as a rigid position, but as a dynamic platform that adjusts to circumstance while maintaining structural integrity. The students took notes frantically. Even Kyle, after his initial humiliation faded, found himself writing down concepts he had never considered. Ed moved among them, adjusting grips, repositioning feet, offering quiet corrections that somehow never felt like criticism. His teaching style was patient and thorough, born of decades spent shaping young soldiers into precise instruments. "Your fundamentals are what you fall back on when everything else fails," Ed said during one pause. "Your battery dies. Your optic takes an impact and loses 0. The light conditions shift and suddenly that bright dot washes out or blooms. What do you have then? You have whatever you learned before you strapped technology onto your gun. If you learned right, you have a foundation that works under any condition. If you skipped the basics and went straight to the easy solution, you have a very expensive paperweight. As the sun began to angle toward the hills, casting long shadows across the range, Ed gathered the students for a final demonstration. He set up 3 steel targets at varying distances. The farthest was nearly 50 yards, a challenging shot for any pistol shooter. "Watch the front sight," he said. "Not me. The sight." He raised the pistol and fired 3 times. 3 ringing impacts echoed across the range. He lowered the weapon and turned to face them. "That wasn't about me. That was about physics and practice and the discipline to do small things correctly, until they become automatic. Any of you can shoot like that. Not tomorrow, not next month. But if you respect the fundamentals, if you build your skills on solid ground instead of convenient shortcuts, you'll get there. And when you do, it won't matter what equipment you're using. You'll be a shooter, not a person who depends on gadgets. A shooter." General Dawson had watched the entire session from the sidelines. As the class concluded, he approached Ed with visible emotion. "You never could resist teaching, could you?" "It's the only thing I know how to give back," Ed said quietly. "All those years, all those missions, they don't mean anything unless the knowledge passes on. These young people, they're not worse than we were. They just need someone to show them what matters." Kyle stepped forward one final time. His earlier arrogance had dissolved completely, replaced by something that looked very much like the humility Ed had spoken about. "Sergeant Major, I owe you an apology. What I said in the classroom this morning was disrespectful and ignorant. I thought I knew something, and I didn't even know what I didn't know." Ed looked at him steadily. "An instructor who can admit he was wrong is an instructor worth following. Keep teaching, son, but remember that teaching means being willing to learn. The day you think you know everything is the day you stop being useful. Would you consider, if you ever had time, we'd be honored to have you as a guest instructor, regularly, whatever works for your schedule." Ed glanced at General Dawson, who nodded slightly. "I could probably manage that," he said, "on one condition. Anything. Every new student spends their first day with iron sights. No exceptions. They learn the fundamentals before they learn the shortcuts. You can add the technology later, but the foundation comes first." Kyle nodded immediately. "Done. Consider it policy." The students gathered their equipment slowly, reluctant to leave. Several approached Ed to thank him personally. One young woman, who had struggled all morning with flinching, showed him her target from the final drill. Her group had tightened dramatically. "You're getting it," Ed told her. "The sights don't lie. Trust them and trust your training." As the range emptied, Ed walked to the edge of the property and looked out over the Tennessee hills. The general joined him there, 2 old warriors watching the sunset. "You could have told them who you were from the start," Dawson said. "That's not how teaching works," Ed replied. "They needed to see what's possible before they needed to know why. The rank, the history, that's just context. The shooting speaks for itself. You're still the best I ever saw. I'm still practicing. That's all any of us can do." Back at the facility's main building, Kyle was already rewriting his curriculum. He kept the sections on modern optics, but he added an entire module on iron sight fundamentals. He included the principles Ed had demonstrated. He referenced the concept of building foundations before shortcuts. And at the top of the new document, he added a dedication. "In honor of those who learned the hard way, so we could learn the right way." Months later, the Ridgeline Tactical Training Center would become known for producing unusually well-rounded shooters. Students who arrived expecting to slap red dots onto rental guns found themselves spending hours with iron sights, learning to focus, learning to press, learning to index with their bodies instead of their eyes. Most of them resisted at first. All of them understood eventually. Ed Whitmore returned once a month to teach. He never accepted payment. He never emphasized his background unless directly asked. He simply showed up with his worn pistol and his patient voice and taught fundamentals to anyone willing to learn. And on the wall of the main classroom, next to the digital displays and the equipment sponsors' logos, the staff hung a simple frame containing one sentence. "The tool doesn't make the shooter, the fundamentals do.